The following events happened to me when I was 18 years old and in my senior year of high school. It was spring break, and my family was going to my uncle's house in Florida. They live in a small but really beautiful home in West Palm Beach. Any of you who are familiar with this area know that it's really nice and popular for people when they reach retirement age. My uncle was around that age and really enjoyed the community he was living in. For as long as I can remember, we would make this trip for spring break. It was cheap and affordable for my parents because we obviously didn't need to get a hotel and we cooked at his house every night. So, the most expensive part of the trip was just getting down there, which wasn't too bad. Next door to my uncle lived a guy named Will, who was basically part of the family. He was an older guy who always made terrible jokes but knew they were terrible, so he usually got a pretty good laugh anyway. My family and I enjoyed his company, especially when we played games. Unfortunately, when we went down to my uncle's house for our yearly trip, Will was gone. My uncle had a new next-door neighbor named Frank. When we arrived, Frank was standing in his garage, pretty much just staring at our car. We waved, and he waved back, but with no emotion on his face. He was tall, over 6 feet, and slightly overweight. He had the build of a bodybuilder who had just gotten older and couldn't keep up with the lifting. His dark black hair was parted with a bit of white sprinkled throughout. The first few nights went great, and we had fun just visiting and enjoying the warm Florida weather. On the third day, my brother and I were throwing the football around the yard when we noticed Frank just staring at us again through his front window. I mean, it was harmless, just kinda weird and creepy. He was just blatantly standing there, holding the curtain back and watching us. Later that night, my brother and I sat outside on the porch, hanging out, talking about the NBA, and enjoying the warm evening. But all night long, we heard strange noises coming from inside Frank's house. It sounded like metal grinding, lots of coughing, and even some faint yelps. And I kid you not when I say all night, 1, 2, even 3 a.m., it just kept going. We thought it was weird, but that was about the extent of it. In the morning, we were eating breakfast, and there was Frank, just sitting in the open garage, looking back and forth between his garage and my uncle's house. How was he up so early? This guy literally must not sleep. He was up all night doing God knows what and making all sorts of noise. We asked our uncle if he knew anything about his new neighbor, and he said he didn't really, other than a polite good morning or how are you today. They really didn't say much to each other. The guy was quiet but always polite to him and stayed out of everyone's business. He didn't attend any community meetings or activities or anything like that. Then we asked about the loud noises at night. My uncle said he didn't really know too much about it and had never really noticed anything before. Later that afternoon, my brother and I were throwing the football around again. Frank left his house in his minivan. We waved, but this time, he didn't wave back. My brother and I both looked at each other and decided to be a bit nosy and go look in his windows. Now, we knew that this was wrong, and I would have never ever recommended doing this. Still, our curiosity got the better of us. We just had to see what he had been doing to make all that racket last night. We couldn't see much, but what we could see was weird. There was really no furniture, just a wood saw in the middle of one of the rooms and sheets hanging everywhere. There were also several shovels by the back door and some plywood on some of the floors in another room. When Will had lived there in the past, we'd been in that house many times, and it looked nothing like this. The house was completely changed, and not in a good way. As we left to head back, Frank stopped us by the side of his house. He'd returned while we were in his yard. He stood blocking our way and asked in a very menacing and low voice, "What are you doing on my property?" Thinking quick on our feet, I just said to him very casually, "Oh, sorry, our ball took a really awkward bounce, and we couldn't find it. We got it now though, we're all good." As we started to walk by him, he barely gave us enough room to pass. When we got to the road, he shouted in a bit more of a frantic voice, "If I catch you on my property again, you'll be sorry." My brother has a bit of a temper, so I thought he would confront the creepy old man, but to my surprise, he was just as freaked out as I was. The next few days, we heard the same noises throughout the night. On the last night of our trip, we decided that we would get to the bottom of this one way or another. At about 2 a.m., we snuck outside and crept up to the window we had looked through the other day. Only now it was completely shut up, just like all of the other windows. We couldn't see anything inside. But just as we were going to give up and go back, my brother noticed a light coming through the back door window, which was still exposed. We snuck up and looked inside, and what we saw still freaks me out to this day. We saw a bit of Frank from the doorway. He appeared to be using the wood saw that we had seen. On the ground before him was something that looked like another human, but it was stiff and stuck in a position like a mannequin. Whatever it was, it looked like it had blonde hair that had been glued on. It had bright red lips and blush on its cheeks. The arms and legs were shiny, as though Vaseline had been rubbed all over them. What the hell were we witnessing? Was it the tinkerings of a madman or something much worse? We left the next day and saw Frank again, standing in his driveway waving goodbye to us. My brother and I felt sick about the night before, our imaginations spinning out. We never did go back to that house. My uncle bought a new, larger home about 35 miles away from his previous community. I often think back to that trip and wonder what was happening there. Was Frank really up to something evil? Or were we just two teenagers letting our minds get the better of us? Maybe he was just a creeper with some type of weird fetish. Either way, I'm glad we never had to see him again. Spring break was just around the corner, and my buddies and I found ourselves scrambling at the last minute to salvage our vacation plans. With hot spots like Cancun and Cabo off the table, we stumbled upon a seemingly perfect solution, a beach house on Coronado Island in San Diego. It was listed on Airbnb and available for a steal. The landlord's instructions were simple, and we found the key hidden in the plants next to the front door. The moment we stepped inside, a peculiar odor greeted us. It wasn't repulsive, but it was definitely off-putting. But the house was impressive, spacious, with an expansive first floor and 4 large bedrooms upstairs. Each of us quickly claimed a room, eager to settle in. Since we arrived midday, we decided to hit the beach right away while it was still warm and sunny. We were on the sand for no more than 10 minutes before I went back inside to look for a volleyball the landlord said was in the upstairs closet. True to her word, I found the closet stocked with various gear, including the volleyball and boogie boards, frisbees, and badminton rackets. But as I closed the closet door, I noticed the one to my room was ajar, even though I was 100% certain I had closed it. I closed it again, then went back outside and asked my friends if they had been in my room, but they all claimed it wasn't them. I found this a little annoying since I was positive I had closed it, but I wasn't going to let it ruin the vacation, so I just moved past it. When it got dark, we dressed up and hit the local clubs, which were buzzing with spring break partiers. I split off from my friends, hitting on this tall brunette with a captivating smile. My attempts at flirting were clumsy at best, and I soon felt the effects of too many drinks that had me feeling worse for wear. Deciding to cut my losses, I stumbled back to the house alone, which was within walking distance of the club. I unlocked the door and left the key in the planter next to the front door, as I told my friends I'd do if I left early. I made sure to lock the door behind me, and if any of my friends came back, I'd assume they'd remember what I said. My head spinning, I made my way to the bathroom, bracing for the inevitable sickness. But as I sat there, a sound from the hallway caught my attention. A soft thud, like something dropping to the floor. Curiosity overcame my wooziness, and I peered out to investigate. I noticed that the door to Ray's room was partially open. There was a small nightlight on in there, and as I walked closer to the door, I noticed someone sitting on the bed, their back to me. I paused, my mind racing. I thought it couldn't be Ray. I had left him behind at the club, and he couldn't have gotten home ahead of me. I suddenly realized I was looking at someone I was pretty sure wasn't Ray. I started backing away slowly, and just like in the movies, there was a slight creak in the wood floor. The figure on the bed turned sharply, their gaze piercing through the crack in the door, directly at me. My heart froze. The man on the bed was a stranger who looked to be around 40 years old. Panic took over. I bolted back to the bathroom, locking the door behind me, making no attempt to be quiet anymore. I first tried to call my friends. As the phone rang on the other end, I saw the doorknob to the bathroom being twisted back and forth. He then started pounding on the door and yelling for me to come out. None of my friends answered, so I tried the owner next, but she didn't pick up either. Finally, I called 911 and asked them to send the police. At some point while I was on the phone, the pounding on the door stopped. I hung up and waited for the police, my ear pressed against the bathroom door, listening for the guy. The police arrived within minutes, and together, we searched the house. The first floor was a quick search, behind the couches, in the closets, in the linen cabinets. Then we went upstairs, checking all the bedrooms, under the beds, and in the closets. It seemed clear. The cop made me fill out some report forms and was on his way. I went back into my bedroom and locked the door. Only when my friends returned did I feel a semblance of safety. Their shock at my story matched my own terror. The next day, I recounted the ordeal to the landlord. Her reaction was one of horror. She immediately suspected her crazy ex-boyfriend, explaining that the room Ray had chosen was once theirs. Despite her offer to refund our stay, we decided to remain, but no one stayed alone in the house. Fortunately, the rest of the week passed without incident. I often wonder what might have happened if the landlord had been there instead. My guess, nothing good.
A couple of years ago, my boyfriend and I took a trip down to Florida for a spring break vacation. We were both extremely stressed from law school and desperately needed a mental break. And what better place to do so than on a beach with warm sand, cool breezes, and crystal clear waters? Unfortunately, the events that soon unfolded were far from the relaxing getaway we had hoped for. To be fair, most of the trip was pretty chill and uneventful. That was until this one night when my boyfriend and I were lying on the beach. This wasn't our usual routine. We never really went to the beach at night, as we both preferred the warm sunlight during the day. But there we were, watching the moon reflect off the water, when two people approached us, seemingly out of nowhere. It was a couple, maybe a few years older than us. The girl was quite pretty, with wild, wavy hair and smoldering eyes. She was wearing a beach cover-up over her bikini. She was holding hands with this guy, who I figured was her significant other. He had a beard and long brown hair tied in a man bun. He wore an unbuttoned red flannel shirt with no t-shirt underneath and just plain bathing suit shorts. They came over and stood there way too close, making my boyfriend and I a little uncomfortable. They didn't say anything, which I thought was weird. Both of them just stared and smiled at us. Honestly, they were smiling for no good reason I could think of. Finally, a little annoyed, my boyfriend said,
"Excuse me, can we help you with something?"
The woman, still smiling, said in a slow, soft voice with a trace of a southern accent, "You two are quite beautiful, you know." I was at a loss for words and just looked at my boyfriend. He just said,
"Thanks, can you leave us alone now?"
By the tone of his voice, it was clear his annoyance was turning to anger. The woman looked at him and said in a chipper, creepy voice, "No thanks." While she continued smiling, her boyfriend stood there, still and not moving. Suddenly, another couple came over, again, both smiling. This new woman also had a cover-up on, but sported some pigtails that were not even close to symmetrical. And the guy with her had really curly, shaggy-looking hair. The first woman, who, by this point, was basically standing on top of us, turned to the newcomers and said, "Check out what we got here." A new couple. I was pretty unnerved by all this and starting to get kinda scared as these 4 people just kept inching closer and closer to me and my boyfriend. My boyfriend finally stood up, stepped toward one of the guys and said,
Yo, don't take one more step, bro.
All 4 smiling weirdos began laughing, and before I could even react, one of the guys lunged at my boyfriend. It was by far the scariest thing I had ever seen. Both men started to beat him up, while both girls just stood there and laughed. I tried to intervene, but one of the girls grabbed me and threw me to the ground. The 2 guys then threw my boyfriend down in the sand next to me, and in the blink of an eye, their permanent smiles turned into faces of anger and hostility. Somehow, my boyfriend had the mindset to do something to help us get out of there. He kicked the ankle of one of the girls, making her stumble. This turned the attention of our attackers from us onto her as she tripped in the sand. In this split second, my boyfriend grabbed my hand and we ran as fast as we could towards our hotel. Looking back from a distance, we could see the 2 couples standing there, but they were not giving chase. We got back to our room and locked the doors, turning the lights off. We could hear giggles and shushes all night long in the hallway. I don't know if we were just being paranoid, but I think we both feared it was those freaks from the beach. We checked out early from the hotel and left for home the next day. We didn't want to risk running into those dangerous weirdos again, which is why we also didn't want to call the cops and file a report, dragging us back into another confrontation with them. As we were leaving the hotel and walking to our car, we saw the 2 girls on the corner of the street. They were waving and smiling at us. We couldn't believe it. We just peeled out of there and left for home, putting the experience behind us. By the time we made it back, we had decided to call the hotel to inform them of our incident. They apologized and said they would look into the matter. But since no police report was filed at the time of the incident, there was probably not much they could do. On our next spring break vacation, we went skiing instead.
Thanks for watching and please subscribe.